Okay, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the next episode of the Biodiversity podcast by Teasels. And today I'm joined by Wendy Allen and Charlotte Hitchmough of Rain Garden UK. And I'm so glad you guys can join me today. Really looking forward to this podcast. We briefly met, well, not briefly, we spent a weekend together a few weekends ago on one of the amazing courses, which we will talk about later. But I found that fascinating, and I thought it would be a really great opportunity for you guys to explain in greater depth what you guys do and how that impacts positively on biodiversity. So over to you guys. So Charlotte, over to you.
Brilliant. Well, thank you very much. We're excited to be here. I've got a few slides that we could whiz through. Just to introduce Wendy and I, and then give a little bit of context about sort of why either of us decided rain gardens were a good idea. So let me just get that running.
I'm just going to interject. If you are listening to this on the audio podcast, I would put your iPod down because it's going to be slightly pictorial. So it's probably best that you go and view it on our YouTube channel. But over to you, Charlotte.
Brilliant, good. So firstly, apologies for the background noise. We're in the office here today, which is a lovely treat, but it means that there's a bit of background going backwards and forwards.
It's a hive of activity. It's a River Kennet HQ, isn't it?
It's supposed to be a quiet day in the office, and it turns out it's not. Anyway, a little bit of background about me. So I work for Action for the River Kennet. We're one of Britain's rivers trusts. And that's the angle I have come from this from. So I'm interested in water quality, wetland environments. But the thing that sort of really made me excited about rain gardens is they are a brilliant way of both alleviating drought, but also alleviating flooding and cleaning water and adding biodiversity. You know, there are so many benefits. And we've been talking about sustainable drainage and how that's a better way of managing water, particularly in our urban environment. And there are so few examples of good sustainable drainage. And so I really was interested in finding out more and how we could be part of building more. So we as an organisation decided that we were going to make some rain gardens, and our very first project was called Rainscapes. And at that point, I completely serendipitously bumped into Wendy Allen, who it turns out lives locally. And in all our research, we keep coming up with examples of gardens that Wendy has done, because she's really been leading the way in rain gardens in domestic settings, and that's really where we wanted to move to. So that's how Wendy and I came together. So this is Wendy.
There I am.
I'll let you introduce yourself, Wendy, with a lovely photo of you just there.
I've got to say, that's a very posed picture. This is my best side. That is.
It's very Dan Pearson, isn't it?
It is very Dan Pearson. You should be looking whimsically into the horizon.
Yeah, I was equally excited to meet Charlotte, because normally nobody's ever heard of me, so it's great to meet somebody as enthusiastic about the potential of rain gardens that I am. And I trained as a garden designer, I think about 15 years ago, and very quickly got sidetracked into SuDS and rain gardens because I love a space that is also functional as well as aesthetic, and to tick both those boxes for me was brilliant. So it was great to meet someone from my local Rivers Trust who wanted to give me the opportunity to create exciting schemes in schools. And I think, schemes in schools give rein to more opportunities for creativity sometimes than in domestic gardens as well. So it's a good opportunity for me as well. And that's why between us, we decided to form Rain Garden UK in order to share the SuDS and get other people interested, and making them aware really of the existence of rain gardens as small scale achievable features in their own gardens.
And this is my favourite slide of the moment, which I'm thinking that Dan's audience will be very familiar with this, and particularly after COP26. But this is the climate stripes, which is for me the most visual way of illustrating that climate change is here now. It's not something that's in the future. It's something that's impacting us now. And it's one of the reasons why we really need to look at drainage. As the air gets warmer, it's able to hold more water. And that's one of the reasons why we're seeing these changing rainfall patterns as part of climate change. So we're sort of entering a wetter world, but the rainfall's landing in a different pattern. So we're seeing much more frequent, intense storms, and then periods of dryness, which is not what our society has been built to deal with. So the climate stripes here were developed by Reading University. You can go onto their website, which is called Show Your Stripes, and you can create these stripes for different locations across the planet, depending what you're illustrating. But the bottom line is, if it's blue, it's below average, a year that was below average temperature, and if it's red, it's a year that was above average temperature. And very quickly you can see that it's getting warmer, and we know that's also affecting the way that rainfall is behaving. And of course, that's been compounded by the fact that we've built on huge areas of land. And even at a garden scale, if you look out of your window at home, you'll see more sheds, more patios, more driveways. We are creating vast swathes of completely impermeable land, which means we get much more runoff. And then we see that in the way that rivers behave. So we're getting much slashier, floodier behaviour from rivers. So there's both fluvial flooding, but localised surface water flooding, and then of course the whole issue around sewage overflows, which have been so much in the news just recently. So this slide here has just got a couple of illustrations of what happens when we interrupt our water cycle. So if we have long dry periods and abstract a huge amount of water from the aquifers, we end up with a completely dry riverbed. And if we have too much water, so much that the pipes can't cope, the rainwater mixed with the sewage overspills and inevitably gets into our river, whether it's because it's being directed there because that's where the pipe goes, or whether it's just a piece of infrastructure overflowing close to the river. It's causing a huge amount of pollution. So we're turning our sort of cool, clear, constant rivers into warm, murky, chaotic rivers. And that pollution of our rivers and pollution of our water is something we should all be taking really seriously, because there are a few things we absolutely can't live without, but water is one of the things we absolutely can't live without. And we all have an opportunity to make it better, which is why rain gardens are so appealing, because it's something that everybody can do to be part of the solution rather than just worrying about the problem. So one of the most useful things to happen to help this kind of communication in the last couple of years is the Rivers Trust got a whole load of data together about how frequently sewage treatment works overflow, and they've put it together in this map called Is My River Fit to Play In? And for the first time, it's exposed how much pollution is going into our rivers as a result of pipes being overwhelmed. And one of the reasons pipes are overwhelmed is that the surface water, so the water that lands on our roofs and our drives, goes into the pipes, and the pipes just can't cope. And so they're the same pipes that carry sewage, and when the pipes can't cope, they just overflow. They're designed to overflow. It's a safety feature. But they were designed to overflow in extreme circumstances occasionally. And what we're seeing is that it's happening routinely because the capacity of the network isn't great enough. So that's one of the reasons why I'm so interested in rain gardens, because they can be a real help in removing that unnecessary rainwater from the system and stopping the overflows and reducing river pollution. So
Charlotte, Charlotte, one thing that springs to mind is I think it's important to make the point that by, like you say, by individual homes doing their bit, I think we can feel helpless at some points. We see this massive problem and it seems so big that we can't, us individuals can't address it. But I think it'd be really important to state that, if we all do our bit as individual householders, and we can do our bit to take the strain off the sewage system, then that will have an impact.
You're absolutely right. And one rain garden on its own won't make much difference, but a street full of rain gardens, and suddenly the numbers are getting really quite big. And if all you did was have a water butt, that would be a massive, great first step. So rain gardens are much more than a water butt, but as an entry level, that's an incredibly useful thing that everybody can do. So it's all very achievable, and at scale is a big part of the solution. And again, I think you're absolutely right. It gets away from that feeling of helplessness. This is something that everybody can do. I always feel I have to apologise for talking about the 4 pillars of SuDS, because it's such a sort of strange way of expressing things. But SuDS is the acronym for sustainable drainage. And a good sustainable drainage system is much more than a pipe to a hole in the ground or a series of underground plastic crates to create a soakaway. A good sustainable drainage system, which is what a rain garden is, will address water quantity, water quality, amenity, and biodiversity. So it should be making nicer places to live. It should be providing amazing opportunities for increasing biodiversity. It will also clean water, and it will also manage flooding, and it potentially can also store water for use in dry time. So it helps with water quality on that side, as water quantity on that side as well. So both the flooding side, localized flooding, and also storing water for use during drought.
Yeah. So if we can go back to that slide, and we'll just stay on that slide for a little bit longer, because as you're talking, the phrase "pipe to bomb crater," somebody once said, and I think that's a really good expression, and it's really interesting, upsetting to see how many SuDS schemes are just a big slimy hole in the ground with a pipe coming into the hole. And I think it's so many missed opportunities. The other three pillars aren't really being dealt with.
Yeah.
So. But,
exactly, and I completely agree. And also, I think it misses that opportunity to communicate with the people who are moving into those houses that they're part of the sustainable drainage system. By still sticking with the basic model that's an underground pipe coming from a house that they can't see, it means that in future, when misconnection inevitably happened, it's still invisible. Whereas if everything's on the surface, if somebody misconnects to it, very quickly you'll see soapy water going down that section of sort of open. I'm going to call it a rill because it sounds pretty. But we want rills, not underground pipes. We want systems that are easy to maintain, that obviously explain what they're doing, that anybody can understand.
And rather than management, Charlotte, as well, started right outside front doors on new developments we're talking about developments of over a certain amount of houses for the pipe to crater solution to be a commonly seen feature. But if the SuDS was on the surface in everybody's garden, it makes everyone living in that area more aware of what they can do on an individual level to help alleviate the problem, or even what the problem is as well.
Yeah.
And that doesn't even touch on the biodiversity benefits that brings to individual gardens as well.
Yeah,
exactly. So yeah, this sort of idea of managing every element, and I'm not going to tell you the story of Bob's coffee shop now. You can come on one of our workshops and learn the story of Bob's coffee shop. But really, the whole idea is, if you look at your local landscape and how much completely impermeable surface there is, and then think, right, where can I create space for water to soak into the landscape? Opportunities to depave, opportunities to add rainwater planters, opportunities to add rain gardens. A typical British high street or any residential area is absolutely full of those opportunities. It just takes a little bit of imagination and some community enthusiasm. So even if the rain garden's not happening in your actual garden, there's tons of opportunity for community action to really start to make a difference. Yeah. And that will improve water quality in both, because rain that lands in a rain planter or a rain garden and comes out the other end will come out cleaner, but also we will be keeping a huge amount of runoff off the streets, and that means that that polluted water won't be running into our rivers. And that's sort of the big win from my perspective, is the more dirty water we can keep out of rivers, the better life is. So the little photograph there is just taken last week, a typical rainfall event, just dirty water washing off a road into a river, and all of that water has come from residential areas. It could only the water that physically lands on the road needs to be in that bit. What actually happens is the water tipping off roofs and drives is also mixing in with that, and that's the vast majority of the water. So we could really make a measurable difference there. And then the biodiversity thing, I mean, Wendy's going to talk a lot about plants and planting, but one of the biggest things I've learned in the last year is when we think of biodiversity, we really often think about, the plants and the flowers at the top of the land. We imagine the birds and the bees and the butterflies, they're all going to benefit massively by our planting. But by having a good biodiverse planting in any sort of garden situation, you do a phenomenal amount for the soil, and there's so much biodiversity that is under the ground that we never really thought about. But in some ways, that's the biggest opportunity to increase biodiversity, is to get healthy soil, and then you get all the things that live in the soil also increasing. So we know that we have only, as science has only identified 1% of the microorganisms that live in the soil. The rest of it, we don't even know what they are. There's so much benefit that soil has, and so much we don't understand. But every time there's an increase in understanding, we suddenly realize how valuable soil is. And to bury all that opportunity under concrete slabs, we just don't need to be doing it. There are so many really positive things we can do by keeping spaces green, that will help all the rest of the spaces that we live in. And sort of finally, in a way, the most important bit is if we can create these green spaces that can soak in water, we are creating great amenity. They are interesting things to look at. They make space nicer to live in. We know about sort of the urban heat island effect and how increased planting in those areas can really help with urban cooling. We know that plants will increase air quality, they will reduce pollution. And we know they look nice, and we know that children who play in green playgrounds have better behaviour. There's so much science that tells us that green spaces make us as people feel better. And if they can also manage water well, then why aren't we doing more of it? And it's a phenomenal opportunity, and really exciting to be part of it. And we're sort of super keen that people learn more and start to really do it. Actually think about it and then do it, because it's not difficult. It's just a case of sort of thinking it through and seeing it as a really exciting opportunity.
I think the thing that came out the course for me is that, like you say, it's not that difficult, and it's just that confidence to not be overawed by it all. Like it is achievable. Yes, you've got to think about it. You've got to think about flows. You've got to think about other things, but you haven't got to make a Herculean effort to get these systems in place. I think that's the one thing that came from the course for me. Like, it is achievable. Like you say, with a community effort, you can get these systems up and running relatively quickly.
Yeah, you really can. And I think, I would like us to move to a point where sort of like in Portland, Oregon, and sort of other places around the world, where there's really financial incentives as well. So as well as giving people the right information and the confidence to do it, they also will help them pay for the cost of doing it, because anything new costs a bit of money. And at the moment there is an incentive, but it's modest. So
Charlotte, are you saying £12.60 is not an incentive? I mean, why is everybody doing it?
It's better than £12.60 because it's usually backdated, so it might be multiples of £12.60. But anybody who doesn't put surface water into their drainage network from their private property will get a rebate from their water company, and that's potentially a useful thing that helps incentivize people to do it. But we would like to see bigger incentives than that, and I think that will be something that's coming as we start to recognise what the benefits of these schemes are.
I don't want to go down that route because we could talk for 4 hours about it. But,
but
the more I sort of do my own reading, you can see those markets are developing, aren't they? So
they are, and there's plenty of models in other parts of the world that we could learn from, and certainly it's been very successful in other parts of the world.
Very good, very good. So just have a little bit of silence so then I can cut all this in later. Wendy, do you want to do your thing? And then I've made you host.
Okay. So I'm going to share my screen and we'll talk about rainwater in your garden for a little bit and how you can get as carried away as I do, hopefully. So as Charlotte was saying, Rain Garden UK focuses on what you might do with rainwater in your garden, but it's also useful to know all this, not just as a homeowner, but as a designer. And although this is going to start with a really high level overview of kind of what a rain garden is, it's like a giant sponge, and you've probably heard the term sponge city. Sponge cities are being created worldwide now, and where whole cities are designed on the principle of rainwater first, and how when that rainwater falls, it's managed and stored and slowed in order to prevent flooding in an urban environment. And that involves a lot of permeable surfaces, but also thinking about levels as well. And let's just advance this slide. The fact that in some circumstances with no rain, you might have areas that can be used with as sort of dry play areas, and then with slightly more heavier rain events, they might fill up and be used for a different purpose. And then if there is a big flood event, those sort of basins will also cope with that. And cities are designed around that principle with rainwater first. And effectively, Sponge City obviously needs a lot of investment to get this thing built, but actually, compared with the cost of repairing the damage caused by floods, that initial investment is totally worth it. And Charlotte and I often bandy around the statistic that in the UK, 1% of housing is on new developments, and the other 99% already exist. So what we can do within our own space to manage rainwater is, you might say 99 to 1 times more important than the stuff that's going on the new developments. So it's using your garden as an opportunity to slow the flow. And I'd highly recommend having a look at slowtheflow.net, which is a community initiative that took place or is taking place in Calderdale near Hebton Bridge in the north of England, where the local community did suffer flooding and took it upon themselves, rather than waiting for government solutions and flood controls, to encourage all local residents to take these small steps and small measures in their own space. And that did include installing water butts and emptying those water butts before a known rain event was due, so that the water butts collectively acted as a leaky dam, on each property. So they massively reduce the surface water that's flowing off of their own properties. And it's a great example of how collective acts can really make a difference. And so this is where I probably first put my love of rain gardens into the public eye, was at Hampton Court 2009 on a garden called the Rain Chain.
Is this your showing off slide?
This is my showing off slide,
Yeah,
but I won't play you a video, although I do like to watch the video a lot as well. But it's more to say, look at all these opportunities when water lands on your building, that you can intercept that rainwater, slow it down, store it, filter it before it goes anywhere near soaking into the ground. Does it ever even need to reach a surface water drain? Probably not. So there's loads of massive opportunities that you could do. We're not going to talk about green roofs today. I'm sure Dan has done a previous podcast with
Oh yeah.
Green roof experts, so hopefully we all know what a green roof is, but they can store and flow up to 60% of the rainwater that falls on them. I used a rain chain, which a lot of people haven't heard about. Rain chains use surface tension to get the water from a roof down to the ground, and they're used in other countries a lot. You can get very ornate ones. This is a very simple one, but it's that start of thinking creatively about how you can, make rainwater look nice as well as move it from one place to another. If you look on Pinterest for rain chains, you'll be there all day, and they're also very simple to hang from existing gutters. My caveat is hang them a little bit further from a building than you would install a downpipe, just to avoid any splashing onto the walls. And then you think about what's under the rain chain. In this case, it was a water butt which stored water, and when the water butt was full, it would overflow into a small rain garden that was 3 meters away from the property and allowed water to soak in. This garden also had small rain planters in, which are filtration rain planters, are sealed units, and they're very useful because they can be placed right next to a building. Unlike a rain garden, it's recommended that a rain garden would be 3 meters away. We go into more detail on all of this on the course, but it's a different way of thinking about a garden from the design point onwards. Think about it from rainwater point of view. For a garden in Marlborough, which is local.
I've got to interject here. I wonder how many people in our industry, our sort of garden design industry, actually do think about this. They actually think about how water is going to act in these gardens, or whether we just think about them purely from an aesthetic point of view, and we're perhaps behind. Sorry, present company excluded, of course, but we're behind the curve, and people are just that there's not an awareness of this, and people are getting caught out.
I think there's a role that garden designers can play in educating clients about the importance of rainwater, and as Charlotte's just covered, the positives and negatives impacts that it can have. So there's a role there that garden designers can play in communicating information, but to do that, they do need to be aware of the information themselves. And certainly I'm going back 15 years now, but when I trained as a garden designer at a couple of different UK institutions, we didn't really cover this in any detail at all. And I don't know how far that's moved on now. Dan, you teach and you're doing a pretty good job of raising awareness out there, but
I'm raising it, but it's not in any syllabuses at all.
Yes, and I think there's an opportunity to kind of create almost not new, but a tried and tested design methodology that should be more commonly used, which is let's start with the rainwater, let's start with the existing levels, let's start with the infiltration. Let's start with managing this surface water effectively to reduce the amount that goes into our surface drains. Doesn't sound very glamorous. I'm sure there are better ways of phrasing it. Calling it sustainable drainage systems is not one of them. Calling it rainscapes might be a way forward, because it is like a landscape. It's a rainscape. It's considering it all. Now, the plan on the right there is a sort of master plan with some photos around the edge that I did for a client on the back garden, where we did exactly that and produced them a master plan that they can implement in stages, in phases, but knowing that master plan is drawn up to enable all the water from the curtilage, from the roof of their property, to be absorbed within the curtilage on the property. So it's a starting point really for thinking about a design, which is what I like to do. And I've put this slide in, a couple of slides in now, of examples of projects that I've done with Action for the River Kennet mainly, and Charlotte, where we have taken sites at schools and introduced rain gardens and or rain planters to try and manage any surface water problems at that site. Downpipes traditionally around here empty onto a pavement or a grass verge, and then from there that well, it's quite a scary amount of water charges down those actually in a rain event, would go onto the pavement, onto the road, collect pollutants and go into the drain, where usually that drain goes straight to the river. And so there was a site here at a school which had a big bare brick wall with the downpipes discharging onto a verge. What I liked was these little plants growing out of the wall, because that informed me of the sort of plants that would actually work in the aspect that we had, which was pretty much north facing. I used some of those in rain planters, so we disconnected the downpipes from the verge essentially, but we had them emptying into a series of filtration rain planters, which we were able to place next to the wall, because as I said, they are sealed units. We used galvanized kettle troughs, which fit with the vernacular of the area and are quite handy to use as rain planters. And we install in those some overflow pipe work and a drainage outlet at the bottom. So water can drain, but we're then in control of where the water goes. And the object of this was to capture and store some of the water and slow the flow and kind of reduce the impact of that first flush of rainwater on storm events. And we also installed a water butt as well. So
I've got to say this, Wendy, because I feel that you know, I absolutely love this project, and I think it's a really good way. It's a sort of, excuse the phrase, it's like the gateway drug for people to get involved or get people to understand about SuDS and water management. And I compare it very much to you know, sort of meadows, because when people, you know, you talk about, oh, you know, I want to help bees and birds and all this, they always mention meadows, and it's people's sort of way into trying to understand about biodiversity, because it's, you know, it's a lovely mindscape and it looks lovely, and that gets people in. And I think that these rain gardens, the blue downpipes, are such a great way to just, nobody's going to read the SuDS manual from page 1 to 217.
917.
Oh God. I must have fallen asleep by page 200. But for communities, for individuals, this is a really great way to sort of connect with this subject in a stylistic way, really.
Yeah, and my brief from Charlotte at Action for the River Kennet was to create something eye-catching that would make people stop and think and look. And we put interpretation boards up on a water butt. Is a great place for an interpretation board. So when people do stop and go, my goodness me, or words to that effect, what is going on that building, they can stop and read about what we're trying to do, and that understanding also enables acceptance of something a little bit different. So that's very important. So we mentioned water butts, and I wanted to put this slide in just because water butts are traditionally quite ugly, aren't they? You can't really get nice looking ones, and when you do, they tend to be very small, like the ones bottom left, 80 litres or 126 litres. That would fill up very quickly, even in a brief summer storm. So it's a good idea, if you want to start storing water, to put a large water butt onto a downpipe. It's also a good idea to think about volumes a little bit, because what you wouldn't want is the water butt to fill up, but the rain planter next to it never to receive any water from the water butt overflow. So there's a little bit of thinking to do about volumes. But they're an incredibly useful way, as we talked about with slowtheflow.net, to act as leaky dams, and each household could slow the flow just with one of these. But we're not with a water butt ticking the biodiversity box that we would like to tick with a SuDS scheme. I won't go into IBC tanks, these cubes on the right. They are used.
Oh no, please do. That
I haven't got much time. I could go on about these all day. They're used for transporting liquids, but they come in this kind of steel cage on a pallet. And Charlotte's got one in her garden for water, but they are a cubic meter, so they're 1,000 litres of storage, which is great. And they tend to be cheaper than water butts of a lesser size. And they've also got this steel cage which can be used for growing climbers up and around. So you can hide the hideous looking water storage as well, if you, with a bit of thought, and you can also link them together. too. But I'm sort of moving through the garden here. I'm thinking after the green roof and our lovely rain chain or downpipe, where could we take the water next? And it could be to a water butt. If our space was limited and we couldn't get a big rain garden in, perhaps a water butt or a rain planter would be a way of absorbing some of the rainfall, so that we wouldn't need such a big rain garden. So they're quite handy when space is limited in urban environments. And then these little gadgets, I like to mention downpipe diverters, because they're the way that you get water very simply with a little bit of swearing from an existing downpipe and into the water butt. So it's good to know about those and to have a look through the different types available. It's not a difficult thing to capture water from a downpipe, put it in the water butt, and when that water butt is full, the water would automatically, because it finds its own level, automatically overflow back down the downpipe. This was a scheme that we did at Ramsbury Primary School, where we got carried away with downpipes. And I have Robert Bray Associates to thank for the inspiration on the one on the left, which was a Torricelli tube downpipe. So I blocked off the steel downpipe at the base so that it fills up with water, and then we drilled 2 small holes in the downpipe so that when it's full up with rain, water will squirt out of those holes and into a rain planter. And when that downpipe is full, water can overflow along the top of a window, down the other side, where it goes onto a water wheel, which was made by a local resident out of a bicycle wheel. This is all out of school, so it's quite fun for the children as well. And then on the right there is 2 more pictures of the Preshute School blue downpipe arrangements, on how it's possible to get totally carried away with those as well, using existing downpipe fittings to join those together. So none of these are custom made, they're all available off the shelf, these downpipe fittings. And then as part of the course, we do this in slightly more detail, which is that what are the layers in a rain planter? How does a rain planter work? So there are 3 different layers which store different amounts of water and enable plant growth. And again, I won't talk into those now, forgive me, Dan. But essentially, the point is it's a sealed unit, which could be a cattle trough, or it could be any other type of planter, into which we install some extra pipe work, so you can see an overflow there for if it should get full up, that's to stop rainwater spilling over the side, and a drilled pipe along the bottom which exits the planter through a tank connector and out of an outflow. And that outflow, it could be directed back into the original surface drain that the downpipe emptied into, it could be, or you can carry on thinking in terms of what you could do in your garden, and you could direct that outflow on into the garden via channel. Charlotte used the word rill. A rill is a posh channel, I think. So you could move to Hesticombe House in Somerset there and have a very expensive looking rill down your garden. You could build a simple rill in all sorts of ways with overlapping tiles. You could build a simple gravel channel through the lawn. And I want to mention this grass swale as well, which is again a simple way of creating a conveyance for water. Swales or strips of grass are also great at absorbing heavy metals. So I think it's a 3-meter filter strip of grass will absorb up to 85% of any heavy metals which move across it. So and
I must input at this point, so the people that are listening from Cambridge, you know, a great example of this can be seen at Eddington, the newest quarter of Cambridge, and how there's swales all through the main thoroughfares through the estate there, and how successful that is at achieving SuDS.
Are they planted swales, Dan, or
planted? No, yes they are. Yes, so they're down to wildflower meadows. Yeah. So again, swales can have plants in as well as convey water, or just be grass. You know, there's various options on all of these. I like to think of a swale as sort of a long thin rain garden, possibly with an extra bit of drainage at the bottom. It's to get water from one place to another, enabling a bit of infiltration along the way. So we're getting the water now from our rain planter, if there's any
left over, if there's any that drains out. It could go on into the garden. Or you could get carried away. If you don't want to channel through your pavement, you could be like Wendy and get carried away with big custom-made metal arcs or channels which could take the water directly from the gutter outlet over a path.
Is this another slide? Is this another show-off slide? Because I completely adore this, because this is one of the reasons months and months ago I contacted you, because I saw this on obviously social media, because that's where life happens, and I was, you know, I'm in the industry and I don't see many original ideas, and it just blew me away. It's so impactful.
Yeah, and I think, you know, no idea is original, is it? These are all inspired from other SuDS schemes or creative rainwater or artful rainwater schemes, you know, or environmental artists projects that I've seen, you know, on you know, and taken on and thought, yeah, that would be possible, why not? And I think that attitude of that would be possible, why not, stands anyone in good stead to have a go. And, you know, you think it through and you do it to the best of your ability to be safe, and then have a go. And that one on the right was the most recent arc that I designed, or commissioned rather, was corrugated galvanized steel, which is commonly used around here in pig arcs, little pig houses. So I knew it could be bent to a radius, so I found a steel manufacturer that could bend it to the radius I needed to get it over the path at that height. And that takes water from an outlet in the gutter and down into a channel, and the channel leads down a handy ready-made slope into a rain garden where it soaks in. So there are carried away and creative ways to get the water into your garden, as well as cheaper and more affordable and achievable ways.
But I've got to say though, but imagine you're a child and you're at that school, how big and how amazing that pig arc looks. And from an early age, but how engaging that space is. You know, it works on a well-designed rain garden, works on so many levels. You know, you think that the impact, you know, that arc and the garden would have on those kids. And I'm not trying to sound all poetic, and I'm not going to tear up or anything, but it does. It's a really engaging way, I must say.
Yeah, thank you. It's all about the drawing attention to the designs things to raise awareness. It always comes back down to that for us. I mean, I am only short as well, only 5'3", so I find it pretty amazing to stand under as well. Lots of 12-year-olds are actually taller than me. So.
I think the other thing that putting rain gardens in schools achieves is suddenly going out in the rain becomes exciting, because the water wheel's working and the pig arc's really noisy because the rain lands on it, and you can see the water moving through the landscape. And the little the image on the left, the water comes down that arc and then it goes over a lovely carved piece of stone, and it's a thing of beauty that becomes full of movement and sound when it's raining, and the kids love it. Whereas before, rain was just something you had to have rainy play for and stay in and, you know, play with felt tips or whatever you did, you know. It's got kids outdoors more, which is a completely unintended benefit, but a benefit nonetheless.
Yeah.
We also created in that space. So on the left, you can see some hedgerow, which when we were allowed to put a rain garden on that space was very, very overgrown, blocked out a lot of the light. So there's always an opportunity around the edges of a rain garden to consider biodiversity and habitat too, as well as the plants that go in it. What we were able to do with that hedge was to get it hedge laid by a hedge layer who worked locally, and then all the cuttings we laid horizontally into a dead hedge at the back of the garden to create a habitat feature. So it saved us taking any waste off the site, and gave us some more habitat as well. And the mix of plants right outside the classroom, it brings other sort of mental health benefits too. So there was a child in that class who would struggle in lessons with, you know, keeping attention, and the teaching assistant used to take him outside to the rain garden, where they would do a bit of weeding, and apparently it was one of the few things that would calm him down, you know, and get him engaged again with what was going on in the classroom. So there are clear, you know, mental health benefits too to these spaces, whether they're at a school or a home. I don't know why that's surprising, because obviously we've all evolved from living in nature. So this is a way of getting nature back into our homes and gardens. And this is looking the other direction, back up at the corrugated arc. So you can perhaps see more clearly how the water comes off the roof down the channel. The channel's just loose lined with EPDM liner and covered with gravel, which gets most of the rainwater. Doesn't have to get all of it down the slope, but it gets most of it down the slope into this flat, shallow depression at the bottom, which is planted up with a good mix of perennials. And there's also some other habitat features at this garden too. So there's a dead hedge surrounding the garden there. And there's also a drilled bee post for solitary bee habitat with a sand mound at the bottom, which, of course, anything I do like this is always inspired by John Little's amazing garden at Hilldrop in Essex. And there are always opportunities to fit these extra features into a garden. So we build on the biodiversity we can get with the rain garden plants and provide extra habitat around the edge. There's also a play feature here, which is a water butt with a sort of pump action handle on the top. So that fills up from a different roof area. It's on a recycled plastic deck. So the water splashes through the deck and into the rain garden during water play as well. And this slide might be shocking to some people, but this is a naked rain garden. So I always show people all the complicated rain gardens I do, and then remember that many people wouldn't really be aware of what's underneath all that. And at the end of the day, this is why it's a simple thing to create a rain garden. It's a shallow, flat, free draining area where the soil is shaped into a low bank or berm around the edge. And that's fed by a downpipe from the house. And it just allows water to be directed there to soak in slowly. And then it's planted with a mixture of nice plants that you like in your garden. We'll talk about those a bit more in a minute. But it's important, I think, to hold this picture. This is all that a rain garden essentially needs to be, plus some plants. And this is an example of a tiny little rain garden we did at a school. So because we had 3 rain planters before the rain ever reached this rain garden, we could have a very small area. This is probably less than, it might be 2 square meters at most, planted up, and then the establishing plants on the right there. It doesn't have to be a big area. And I think nowhere is that shown better than the front of the UK Rain Garden Guide, which was by Bob Bray, Dusty Gedge, Gary Grant, and Lani Lethivsky. I never know how to say her surname, and I must ask her one of these days. So this guide was written, I think, at least 10 years ago now, but it remains the only sort of domestic rain garden guide really that's accessible, I think. We've mentioned the CIRIA SuDS Manual, which is the professional industry best practice for sustainable drainage systems. But I think this is a great guide. It can be downloaded for free from raingardens.info. And it's for residential and small scale sort of retrofit use. And it's a really good starting point to share with people. And it doesn't necessarily go into a lot of detail about how you create these features. And I think that's where Charlotte and I felt there was a gap, is we wanted to share our knowledge and experience of actually building these features with some specifics on practicalities of creating them, so that people could go away feeling enabled to create them themselves.
And I should say at that point that the Rain Garden Guide was all those years ago funded by Thames Water, and they have been one of the funders of the workshops that Wendy and I have been running most recently. So they funded the most recent workshops along with Wiltshire Wildlife Trust. And it's really great to see water companies and other organisations being prepared to sort of recognise the benefits and then fund these sort of projects, which mean that then we don't have to charge people to attend workshops. And that for us has been brilliant, because at the moment we're still convincing people, explaining to them what they are. So we're sort of at the stage where it's really about inspiring people to build them, and we don't want that to be a cost barrier in the way to coming and finding out more. So support from organisations like that has been just really brilliant.
And do you feel that, because I'm talking from Cambridge here, do you hear on the grapevine that other water companies are doing similar things that they put part of their budget aside to pay for these outreach projects? Is that kind of the done thing within the water industry?
I think it really varies, but I think most of them are doing something. And I think we would all just like to be doing it at a bigger scale, or maybe inversely at a smaller scale, in the sense that very often they're investing in big new build projects, which is great, but actually the biggest win is enabling lots of people to do lots of little things. That's harder for a water company to have control of exactly where the spend is going, but actually that's where the biggest opportunity is.
So plants, that's what we all love about rain garden. We all love the plants, and I'm going to put soil into that sentence as well. The soil is just as important as the plants. And despite the name, rain gardens only contain shallow water for brief periods after heavy rain. And you'll probably find the biggest misconception about rain gardens is that people think they are ponds, and that because they're called rain gardens, they must be wet all the time. However, the opposite is true. Rain gardens must be free draining, and they are mostly dry features. So the plants that go in them need to be quite adaptable, and they need to withstand brief waterlogging, but also be drought tolerant. So it's almost best to err on the side of drought tolerance, because what you're creating is a sort of moist but free draining soil, even in the wettest areas, in an ideal world. So the drought tolerant plants can be positioned sort of higher up the slope around the rain garden, and the plants that may be more marginal, such as our native rushes or flag iris, they're the sorts of things you might consider putting right by the inflow. So even in small rain events, they get some water. So considering plants in terms of soil moisture within the rain garden is one approach. And I'm not going to talk through the other three benefits of SuDS, so I'm going to stick, as we're on plants, with the biodiversity element of a rain garden. So the plants we use in a rain garden can really support any efforts locally. And I would just mention here, local biodiversity action plans quite often provide inspiration of what you could include in your rain garden to benefit, local biodiversity and what's needed in your area. And again, I'm sure all the people listening to this podcast will have heard all the Living Planet, report figures that we've seen lately. There's figures from saying 76% of insect biomass is gone, and that's, I want to say in the last 25 years, but it's in my lifetime. I am much older than 25, but since I was born, most of the nature, most of the biomass, most of the wildlife in this planet has gone, and that is literally just in my lifetime. And when you think about the whole of human existence being comparatively the blink of an eye, the fact that we've done that much in our very, very brief time is particularly shocking, and we need to start rebuilding what we've completely trashed. So again, all of these little initiatives that people can do and be aware of are making a big difference. And I'll mention Dave Goulson's book there, The Silent Earth, Averting the Insect Apocalypse. It's a great Christmas book buy if anyone's looking for a purchase.
Yeah, it really is. Dave Dave is absolutely Professor Dave. He's very good. He's
absolutely. And I know you've done a podcast with him too, haven't you, Dan?
Who haven't I done a podcast with?
Always worth listening to.
Yeah, but again, he puts it in, but it's all joking aside, it is a great read because he puts it in quite a depressing subject. He puts it across in quite an entertaining way and does get the message across, really.
Yeah. And then we always talk about soils a bit in our workshops as well, because a healthy soil has a good soil structure, has a good organic matter content, and that enables roots to flourish and grow. And root structures are what helps a soil infiltrate, store, and filter water, as well as provide a sort of surface environment, like on the surface of the roots is where the soil organisms will flourish. And So a healthy soil has more micro and macro pores, and those small pores within the soil, those small air pockets, make the plants better able to filter and store water and carbon, or the soil better able to store carbon. So that's carbon sequestration. And we could spend a whole day talking about that. And it's a field that I'm still learning about myself, but it's so applicable to an effective rain garden. It's how healthy your soil is. And biodiversity within a garden, I think there are two great examples here. These are not rain gardens, but just to see how a mosaic of habitats commonly found within a garden environment can result in more biodiversity. So biodiversity comes from complexity, and there's two examples here. Great Dixter have done surveys of wildlife and insects in their garden, and the findings are available on their website. And Great Dixter is quite a traditional garden, if you like, but it has a huge range of habitats and plants, and native and non-native. And then another link at the bottom to the grassroofcompany.co.uk, which have an amazing brownfield landscape that use recycled substrates to create unexpectedly efficient areas for plants to grow. And these are not rain gardens, but it's all examples of how we can encourage biodiversity into our garden using plants and thinking about plants and thinking about what they grow in. So a healthy soil for a rain garden is just as important as those substrates as well. And I want to draw attention as well to the fact that the Royal Horticultural Society in the UK has very recently, in September, announced their planet-friendly gardening campaign. So they have a sustainability strategy now, and water management is one of the 6 key areas in there. And rain gardens are a key part of that sustainability strategy. So I think more homeowners through this are going to become aware of the existence of a rain garden, and perhaps need more advice and need more direction from a garden designer that, you know, comes into their property. So that's a great first step. And I think that the RHS have used the picture there of my 2009 rain garden at Hampton Court. So it's still going strong after all these years. So yes, and obviously Gardening in a Changing Climate was a report they wrote a few years ago, which is still very relevant. So plants are key, and there's so much research and knowledge you could apply to plants. I think what we provide in the workshop is a sort of a list of key plants to start you off, but there's always others that can be introduced. Two of my favourites are this Deschampsia on the left there. Deschampsia is an evergreen grass that tolerates most soil conditions and aspects, and it's semi-evergreen, and it looks brilliant, and it will give you winter structure with seed heads as well. And seems to be an indestructible rain garden plant. It's not a thug, it just looks great. And surprisingly, I put the one on the right end, which is a Salvia caradonna. So Salvia traditionally is it's a Mediterranean plant, and people would say don't plant those in a rain garden because they won't like wet roots. However, we're sort of finding the opposite really. It comes down to what I just said. If your garden is well drained and it's free draining, and rain gardens are mostly dry, and you only get inundation for brief periods, then really if these plants are on the slope of the rain garden and not right next to the inlet, there's no reason why Mediterranean plants shouldn't work in a rain garden environment either.
Because if we come back full circle, you know, we're coming back to how our weather patterns are changing. So we have longer periods of weather locked in, don't we? So we're going to have longer periods of drought and then a weather event. So it kind of stands to reason, really.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I say, if it's free draining, which it should be, then you might be surprised at the range of plants that will work in rain gardens. It's not as daunting as it might otherwise seem. And when we present the course, I do a lot more slides on plants, but I just wanted to include this one, which is about roots. So one of my key planting design principles is roots, because traditionally back in the day, and what you'll see in a lot of the US rain garden guides is diagrams of blocks of plants, 7 of these, 9 of these, 5 of these in blocks. And none of them are sort of intermingled within each other at all. And traditional planting design have probably been about swathes of plants or planting in groups. And once you start thinking about what's going on below the surface in terms of root structure, and this is why perennial plants are so good in rain gardens, is because perennial plants have a deeper and more complex root system than annuals do. And what you can end up with is this sort of dense root coverage. If you plant the rain garden fully, you get the maximum infiltration and the healthiest soil, because you've given the soil that variety of root structure that Charlotte alluded to earlier. It's a sort of thing that's going on with regenerative farming now, is to think about the roots on plants to improve soil health. But as we know now, it also improves soil porosity and the ability for soils to store carbon. So
who would have thought it, eh? Nature knows best. Who would have bloody thought it?
Who would have thought, undoing all the work we've done for the last 70 years. So I'd also like to mention Claudia West at this point. She wrote this book, which is Planting in a Post-Wild World. She put that together with Thomas Rayner. They're based in the States. Claudia is originally from Germany, and her expression is matrix, not monoculture. So to do some research of her work in plant communities, I personally, and as Rain Garden UK, advocate a mix of native and non-native plants within a domestic rain garden. I think that makes a lot of sense, from encouraging the greatest amount of biodiversity and increasing the season of interest. Claudia as well investigates natural plant communities or native plant communities, but also does schemes including non-native plants all over the world. And there's some really useful pointers there about how you can start thinking in detail about rain garden plants. Or you can just go to the Rain Garden Guide, or take our standard list of plants to start you off. So, but it's just such a fascinating field. I think more research is always a good thing. And then sometimes you see plants, perhaps they've been designed with the planting groups of 3, 5 or 7 plants, and then between those plants you've got great big areas of mulch, which might be hardwood bark chip or gravel, and what you end up with is a rain garden full of mulch but not many plants. And it needs to be the other way around. You need to fill the gaps between the plants with other plants or lower ground cover plants, so you get that continuity and that complexity, which, as we know, results in more biodiversity. And there's a load of resources there. Look, I can stop blathering on now. I think Dan is going to put these resources in the details at the end of the, or
there will be that will be
so I won't go through those, but there's sort of domestic scale reference guides and the industry SuDS Guidance links there as well, and then a SuDS by sector overview, which is quite useful, which the GLA recently produced. So you can get a little guide about how SuDS might work in schools, social housing, parks, hospitals, commercial and retail. That might be a bit more accessible.
So there's no, I guess the overarching point is there's no shortage of information. There's no
exactly.
There's no, basically what you're saying is there's no bloody excuse. Just get on with it and start to put in these rain planters. And all joking aside though, but there are obviously, along with your courses, of course, there are so many resources out there, aren't there? So it shouldn't be, again, such an effort to start to think about these things very quickly.
I think that the amount of resources is a stumbling block for a lot of people. I mean, none of us have a lot of time, so when it involves looking through so much information to distill what you actually need, that's what takes the time. And I think that's another kind of gap that we're hoping to fill with courses, is we give people the basics and you kind of know what you need to know approach, but you'll certainly know enough to get on and do a basic rain garden or rain planter that falls below any planning permission required for SuDS in England, Scotland or Wales. So yes, there we go. That's the course Dan came on at the bottom there with a group of people drilling holes in a piece of waste pipe to put in the rain planter.
Well, I was the on-site photographer. I wasn't drilling.
You didn't drill
I was the paparazzi, you see.
Yeah. So yes, I don't know if Charlotte wants to add anything else, but that's us, and we're always happy for people to get in touch as well. At Rain Garden UK on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, if you want to speak to us more about those. Thank you, Dan. Shall I stop sharing now?
You can stop sharing. Yeah, that's all good. We have a period of silence and then we can cut this in later. Cool. So thank you very much, guys. Slightly different format to the usual podcast, but thoroughly enjoyable, thoroughly informative. And thank you very much, guys. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks very much for inviting us along.
Good stuff.
Lovely. We hope we've inspired some people to act.
You certainly will do. And then, yeah, it'll be people's New Year's resolution to get out there and create planters and rain gardens. So cool. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.